Group suing Missouri claims the state is silencing some voters through restrictive laws. The Missouri Supreme Court will decide whether voters should have to show a government photo ID. Our Missouri Capitol reporter Hannah Falcon breaks down the arguments heard in court today.
Before a panel of Missouri Supreme Court judges Wednesday, the Missouri NAACP, ACLU, and several others argued to dismiss a nearly 4-year-old law.
To uphold the fundamental right to vote and fundamental rights to political speech.
Denise Lieberman with the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition represents several Missourians who had difficulty getting the right kind of government-issued ID to cast a vote because of clerical issues and disabilities.
It is not whether someone is, through Herculean measures, able to ultimately climb that high mountain and overcome those burdens. What the law prohibits is abridgment or burden on the right to vote.
This case challenges a 2022 law that requires a government ID to cast a vote and restricts several other parts of the voting process. In the 2022 election, 116 ballots were thrown out for not following the law.
The General Assembly and the people, when they passed the constitutional amendment, have actually made it very simple.
However, Missouri Attorney General Catherine Hanaway says their argument is weak because the people named in the lawsuit were able to ultimately get the required ID and cast their votes.
Look, the goal here is to make sure that every Missourian who wants to vote gets to vote. But any Missourian or anyone from outside Missouri who wants to cheat can't cheat.
A ruling in this case is expected in the next few weeks. Reporting in Jefferson City, I'm Hannah Falcon.